بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الحدي حدي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. After reciting the ayat of reminding us to have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, consciousness towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the life of the mu'min, the believer, in all of their affairs is one of fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَقَدْ وَصَّيْنَا الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ وَإِيَّاكُمْ أَنِ اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ. Indeed, we did give the advice, the legacy to the people of the book before you, that you should fear only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the beginning of the Muslim's journey and the end of the Muslim's journey is based upon the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and likewise in between in all of their affairs. Thus many of us may become vigilant about Arkanul Islam, about the pillars of Islam, Ahmiyatul Salah, the importance of prayer, the importance of belief. But some of us don't seem to take the ahmiyah, the importance of one's household, or one's family, or one's children, whereby the Quran mentions, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. O you believe, save yourselves and your family members from the hellfire, whose fuel is men and stones. عليها ملائكة غلاظ شداد لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. Upon it are stern, harsh angels who never ever disobey their Lord and carry out whatever they've been commanded to do so. So this is the primary journey of the Muslim in after searching for what we may think to be the ideal spouse, after studying the rights and the regulations. Many of us begin to read about them, but reading about them is only a small benefit. It's only when a person begins to enter into the world of responsibilities that then a person really begins to understand and implement what we've been told to do or encouraged to do. So at the moment it may only be a skim reading, and even then this knowledge is one that needs to be implemented upon our family members, and before that upon ourselves. Likewise, we find the basis of our discussion today, the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ul an ra'iyatihi. All of you is responsible, has some sense of responsibility, and everyone will be responsible for their flock or their sheep or their subjects which are underneath them. So as many of us, we begin to go into the further extreme elements of whatever it may be, the political dimensions around us, not to say they're not important, that some of us begin to lose focus of the people directly around us. As thus you find, تَبْنِي قَصْرًا وَتَهْدِمُ مِصْرًا. You build a palace, but whilst building that palace, you destroy a whole city. You destroy a whole nation. So some of us, we may think in this disguise of modernism, of moving forward, or developing ourselves in the modern world, in the modern Islamic family that we find, so-called modern Islamic family, that we're building a new nation. But whilst building that nation, or building that one palace, we've destroyed a whole city. We've destroyed a whole empire. We've destroyed a whole complete ummah in a misunderstanding of our rights and our responsibilities. So that sometimes a Muslim needs to go back, not just one step, many steps back, to begin to see that why are we falling? Why are we collapsing on so many occasions? And thus you find that many of the philosophers and many of these individuals who write about sociology talk about that the network of the family shows the strength of a nation, of a people. The strength of your family unit, even simple things that we find, some of us may take them as simple, to sit down together as a family and to eat together, one meal in a day shows a strong family bond. These are all based upon prophetic traditions of eating together. But in the modern world that we find, everybody eats at their own separate times, in their separate rooms, in their own understanding, separating from one another. And this has begun to fall into us as well. Likewise, we find a lack of tolerance in the way that we should be conducting ourselves inside our homes. That a person inside the home should be a lenient, a tolerant individual of understanding of the affairs inside their home. We find also the Quran mentioned, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا عَلَيْكُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ مَنْ ضَلَّ إِذَا اهْتَدَيْتُمْ. Or you believe, upon you is to focus upon your own selves. Shouldn't trouble you about those people who may have become misguided. There are some works of tafsir talk about Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu highlighting tafsir of this ayah, but we want to just focus in on this point for now. That upon you, alaykum anfusakum, that upon you is to worry about your own self initially. That's the beginning of the Muslim. Don't get so worried about those people who begin to stray away any from the path. We can come back to them at a later stage. Then the second stage that we find, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. Once you begin to work upon your prime family members, you then move to the people who are aqrab, the people slightly closer to you. And then you begin to deliver the message to those individuals. Until eventually you find, يَا أَيُّهَا الْمُدَّثِّرْ قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. Or one who's been wrapped up, enveloped in the garments, قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ. Now go out and warn the people. So many of us, we just want to go and warn the people. That's what some of us we want to do. We don't want to warn and remind the people close by, our relatives. We don't want to warn and remind the people exactly who are in front of us. Because sometimes it's shaq, sometimes it's sa'ab, sometimes it's difficult to talk to the people that you love. That there could be people who are obstinate to the message, who turn away from the message. But in alayka illa al-balagh, upon you is to try to convey the message. Laysa alayka hudahum, walakin Allah yahdi man yasha. It's not upon you to guide, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides whomever He wills. Innaka la tahdi man ahbabt, walakin Allah yahdi man yasha. You cannot guide the people that you love, or the ones that you love. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that guides. But how many of us take those efforts to help, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to guide those individuals or to deliver the message to the people around us? And so thus we find, before we begin to talk about the greater jihad and the greater struggle, in a nutshell, living in the West, to take care of your family, to bring a household, is a type of jihad. From the day that you wake up, or before you even wake up, even times in your sleep, to when you actually fall asleep, it's a continuous struggle of bringing up your family in this environment. And thus you find, وَعِدُّ لَهُمْ مَسْتَطَعْتُ مِنْ قُوَّةٍ. Prepare for them in all forms of strength and power. And that's this initial training of a person who's able to take care of their home, take care of their family, take care of the subjects, the children underneath them, and exerts their efforts. It will become very simple and easy for that individual to to be shifted from that location to a different location and begin to work with other individuals. Because if a person can bear the difficulties in this type of scenario, yes, those scenarios may be very, very difficult. They seem very difficult, but become very easy for the individual who's able to control and to preserve, to present themselves and to understand the role and responsibilities. So in that journey of roles and responsibilities, I'm sure that many of us have covered, those individuals always interested in marriage and go through various texts and nusus, etc., that we find. The real essence of those rights and those regulations begins to fall or begin to take place after marriage. That's when it really begins to be displayed of the rights and responsibilities. It only comes via experience. If you asked me some 15 years ago to talk about this, then I don't think I'll be the right person, and possibly even after 15 years I'm possibly still not the right person. But maybe some 15 years of some minor experience may give me the right to discuss a few things, inshallah. So some things can be just basic knowledge a person could read and understand and to preserve it. But its actual implementation, it requires experience to go through that. And thus we find that many of the things that we study in an excitement about getting married, etc., that we find tazawwuj al-walud al-wadud, married, the loving and the fertile, that we find, what does it really mean to marry the loving and the fertile? Or the women dream about this special character, or this Romeo character that we find, this great loving character, but then we find, as we say, that marriage is not a bed of roses. There's a depiction that some people, marriage, I like to describe it, marriage or mirage. That once you get to that destination, it ends up being something else. So what will keep that individual together? What are the teachings that we find that will help the individual, that each individual is able to take care of their responsibilities or offer their responsibilities and to get through those difficulties, get through those hardships, and then be able to visualize, as the Quran describes, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. We placed immense love and affection between the two spouses. Indeed, there is signs for people who ponder and who reflect. So how does a person gain that love and that emotional feeling and that affection? Because obviously we know, according to al-Islam, there's no love before marriage. Love is after marriage. The love before marriage is a shallow love. It's a weak love based upon certain elements, weak elements of the dunya. The real love begins to take place after marriage. The struggle and difficulties, especially when children are born, you find that is the real challenge of fostering, of nurturing and taking care of the children to create a new prestigious ummah. Thus you find that the ummah that some of us may be creating at the moment may be a weak ummah. Doesn't have that strength, doesn't have that focus. So we want to look at certain elements from within the Quran that begins to talk about what's known as tarbiyatul awlad, bringing up our children and at the same time bringing ourselves up as well. Many ulama have written various rasail about fiqh al-zawaj or fiqh al-usra, the fiqh of family, the fiqh of marriage, or tarbiyatul awlad for Islam. You find Dr. Nasir al-Ulwan, if I'm not mistaken, wrote 2 volumes talking about the essence of bringing up children inside Islam and ways that we can use these sources. But all of these beneficial works that we find are in general based or extracted from the Quran and the prophetic traditions and put together and simplified for us. So we want to go back to one of the main sources that many people use as an evidence for tarbiyah, for cultivating and pruning and teaching ourselves. And those ayat, most of the Quran is full of numerous locations about education and behavior and etiquettes that we find. But there's certain ayat inside Surah Luqman, the 31st chapter of the Quran, which has a number of ayat inside the beginning from verse 12 onwards to about verse number 19, talking about how we can train ourselves. And inshallah we hope to delve into them and to extract some lessons to benefit all of ourselves, to better ourselves, to become better parents, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, children, etc. from the lessons to be extracted inshallah from these ayat inside Surah Luqman. So we find that the first thing that's mentioned, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِلَّهِ وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمَنْ كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. So here we find that indeed we did وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ. Indeed we have given Luqman al-hikmah, wisdom. The discussion begins to take place amongst ulama of tafsir like Ibn Kathir rahmatullahi alayh, that who was Luqman? Because obviously many individuals, that what comes to their mind is that Luqman was possibly a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the most accurate and strongest view, that Luqman was a wise individual. And you find various wordings, whether you read the tafsir of Imam Suyuti, Durrul Manthur, talking about Luqman, kana Habashiyan, was an Ethiopian, Abyssinian, black individual, a wise individual who had been bestowed with wisdom. وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Whoever's been blessed with wisdom has been blessed with immense goodness. So the family unit is based upon wisdom, because wisdom in general, as ulama have described it, وَضْعُ شَيْءٍ فِي مَكَانِهِ, to place something in its right place is a sign of wisdom. So you know what correct statement to make, the correct action to make, is putting everything in its right place. And thus we find that the concept of rujula, of manhood that we find, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are more dominant, more powerful than women. What does being powerful more than women does it mean? Many people say that it goes back to physical strength and muscles, etc. That's one small meaning. The meaning of ar-rujula or qawwama is the ability to place everything in its right location to take care of their affairs. So that is the Muslim man. That the young individual should be trained to be able to take care of their responsibilities. Are we creating an ummah of responsibility? Or are we creating an ummah who doesn't seem to care less about its responsibilities? So Luqman had been given, wisdom had been bestowed upon him, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon him. So the person who is wise thinks and comprehends and does not go upon one's desires. And we find that a number of the prophets have been bestowed, or if not all of the prophets have been bestowed with that wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we find the concept of giving thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyhow, the main thrust of the ayat that we find, whereby وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. Luqman is speaking to his son, وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ, he's admonishing him, he's reminding him. And he's saying to him, لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ, don't commit shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. Indeed, shirk is the most biggest abominable action, the gravest sin that a person can commit. So the essence of the Muslim home is based upon belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the authentic belief. Many people, you may have studied before, the basis of their marriage is what? Based upon what? Is it based upon deen? تنكح المرأة لأربعة لمالها ولجمالها ولنسبها ولدينها فاظفر بذات الدين تربت يداك أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. A woman is married for her lineage, for her wealth, her property, or for her deen. Choose the woman of deen, and indeed your hands will be successful. So the essence of the Muslim should be what? Tawheed, the belief, rectifying one's belief. And thus you find that marriage, as just like you go and construct a building, you go and check the soil. Before you construct a building, You find if you go to those individuals involved in engineering, they begin to take samples of the soil to see that it's going to be possible to construct a building on top of that soil. So if that soil, it may smell nice, it may look nice, but that soil is not able to bear the foundation, eventually the foundation will begin to collapse. So the initial foundation of the Muslim is the belief. If the belief is corrupt, whatever you place on top of it will eventually collapse. So the Muslim has to make sure the first lesson they teach their family members, they teach their children, is the correct belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we know that from personal experience living in this environment, many of us have compromised. In a sense, at times we've shied away from our faith. We don't want to display we're Muslims. We don't want to express we're Muslims. For whatever reasons, when we came here in the 50s, in the 60s, and being surrounded, being a minority, etc., not speaking the language. So some of us may have compromised or shied away. Should we now instill that same concept of belief to our children? No. We should be instilling within them that they should be, as they say, proud about their faith, proud about their conviction, proud to be a Muslim, and proud to take a stance to stay away. Because we know how many of our family members still have shirkiyat, still have khurafat, ill practices, bid'at that they have, and sometimes we may just turn aside. No, we should teach our children that don't become like us, become better than us. Take a more powerful stance, a stronger stance to uproot this evil. Because the Quran tells us, وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ بِاللَّهِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ. Most people believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but yet they commit shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is the first lesson, that maybe the things that I have not been able to do in my life, I can instill that within my children. Likewise, other lessons we can extract from this, the Muslim household. Maybe I have not been able to learn the Quran proficiently. I'm not able to memorize it. Maybe I don't have the time because of work commitments, whatever it may be. But why don't I exert my efforts upon my children? If we want to create that brighter future, we're always worried about skillful individuals in medical sciences and other skills that we need. Without no doubt, they're important. But how many of us stop to think, I want to impress upon my child, to encourage my child to memorize the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But because some of us, we see that the memorization of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the studying of Islamic knowledge is something adna, is something lowly, something debased. We don't show it as something which is privileged. I don't want to use this word, but it should be a point of fakhr, being proud. Just like people boast about their academic work, etc. So the parent should be proud about their children, instilling within them that they are following the correct and the pristine teachings of Islam, that all of us should be following throughout our lives. And thus we find that after this concept of shirk, that you find that he is admonishing his son. Another lesson to be extracted from here is because many fathers, they leave the role of tarbiyah to the mother. Yes, the mother is the first madrasa. The mother is the first teacher of the child. And that's when mothers are busy trying to go and follow their career and to follow a job, even in the Islamic world. If they're making their own children suffer, then there's no need for you to follow that career. Simple. There's no point to become a candle giving light to other individuals and you burn yourself away. You don't have the time to take care of your own children. You don't have the time to give tarbiyah to your own children. There's no need for you to go and teach other children. That's a misunderstanding, misrepresentation of Islam. That to think to go and take care of other people's children and not to take care of your own children, you've misunderstood Islam. Islam begins within the home. The prime role of the woman, the mother, is to teach her children and to take care of her children. And then also comes the father. We shouldn't just push it on the mother, because many of us, that's what we think. She is the first teacher and the father is the first role model. The father is the first instructor. Here you find the advice is there. Luqman is giving the advice to his own son, letting him know and teaching him. Thus you find that amongst the best things, some narrations, narrations need to be checked, but we mention them anyhow because the meaning is true. The best thing that the father can give his child is good character and good upbringing. And thus you find the Arab poet, he wrote these lines of poetry. لَيْسَ الْجَمَالُ بِأَثْوَابٍ تُزَيِّنُنَا. Clothing isn't what we wear which adorns us. بَلِ الْجَمَالُ جَمَالُ الْعِلْمِ وَالْأَدَبِ. Beauty is the beauty of knowledge and etiquettes. لَيْسَ الْيَتِيمُ الَّذِي قَدْ مَاتَ وَالِدُهُ. The yatim, the orphan child, isn't the one whose father has passed away. بَلِ الْيَتِيمِ الْعِلْمِ وَالْأَدَبِ. The yatim child is the one who's been taught no knowledge and no etiquettes. So in our world, we think the orphan is the one who doesn't have a father. In the world of Islam, the orphan is the one who's never been taught any knowledge or any etiquettes. And thus you find in Islam, irrespective of who the individual is, there's always one question a person is asked. Either who is your father or who is your teacher. Everything revolves around that. Even to this day, ask any teacher, their essence is based upon who was the first person that taught you. Either it must have been your father or it must have been a teacher. So many of our children, yes, there's many orphans out there in the world, but many Muslim children at the moment, they are orphans. They've never been taught the proper education or the correct adab. And as you can see that the havoc inside our society, the mishaps inside our society, and even in this new Islamic awakening that we find that so many individuals, and we have to be blunt, so many individuals, all that they think about is about their private parts. Discussions about to get married for a second time, for a third time, for a fourth time. Yes, it's a sunnah which is encouraged inside the Quran. فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدًا. The beginning of Surah An-Nisa that we find, marry whatever you want from the women, 2, 3 or 4, cannot be just, marry one. Sunnah which is jaiz, which is allowed. But for some people, that's all what their life becomes. That's all that their life becomes. They don't think about the responsibility that for every single child that comes into the world, what are we creating in our society? We have broken homes at the moment. We have single mothers at the moment. We have single parents. We have children who've just been left to their own devices. We have children who are homeless. And this isn't the average Muslim child we're talking about. These are children who've come from a so-called Islamic environment. That's something to ponder and to think about as we began with, that what ummah are we creating? Are we just creating an ummah of lust and desires? Are we really trying to lift our ummah up to that higher level of spirituality, of devotion? Maybe in our ranks of sunan, we've placed those sunnahs which are recommended and moved them up to a higher priority. And those which should be at a lower priority, we're trying to shift those up, and those at a higher priority, we're trying to move them to a different degree, to a different understanding. That's possibly why we are in this topsy-turvy state at the moment, this Muslim ummah. So that's another lesson that we can extract about the role of the father, of being a visible father, a visible impact. Yes, we know that our fathers, with all respect to them, they still done a damn good job. In their career, in their life, whatever they did, they still tried their best to teach us some basic moral teachings. And they were astray in the sense away from the society. Today we possess the language, we have the abilities, we have everything, but yet still we're not able to spend time with our family members and our children to try to help cultivate and to activate them or to help them. Then we find it begins to mention, and وَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرُ. Then he begins to mention about the role enjoined, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, enjoined upon mankind to show goodness to one's parents. His mother bore him on hardship, weakness upon weakness, in a state of hardship. And thus we find that the role of the mother, that some fathers don't show the respect to the mother, so what happens naturally to the child? If the husband mistreats his wife in front of the children, we're not saying that there's not going to be argumentation or misunderstanding. That's normal. No one's doubting that fact. But it's a certain thing that children can very quickly understand. That if my father doesn't care about my mother, he doesn't seem to respect my mother, then why should I respect her? Why should I bother to respect her? When the Quran is telling us that the mother is the one that bore him, the child, hardship upon hardship. To such a degree that the Quran describes Maryam alayhi salam, Surah Maryam, the 19th chapter of the Quran, قالت يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا. Maryam alayhi salam says, if only I died before this and I was something that was forgotten. A young woman, unmarried, never touched by any man, pregnant with a child, worried about what the people would say, feeling the pains of childbirth, said these words. And as a side point, possibly every single woman says exactly the same words in a different form. If only I was dead before this. That difficulty that you find that a woman has to go through, no man will ever imagine that each of our mothers went through to deliver each and every single one of us. And thus the reward is immense. That if a woman dies in a state of labor, she becomes classified as a type of shahida, a martyr, whilst delivering the child. And thus we find that the utmost respect is to be given to the mother, that she bore the child in a state of difficulty upon any difficulty. And thus we find the rights of women are forgotten. وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Live with them in a state of goodness. Likewise in the hadith, إِسْتَوْصُوا بِالنِّسَاءِ خَيْرًا. Give you the legacy and advice to be good towards anyone's women, one's wives. And thus we find at the same time, what we learn from this is to study the nature of the woman. That psychologically, the woman is different from the man. Biologically, the woman is different from the man, not like what the world is trying to tell us today, that even biologically, everybody is the same. The Quran tells us, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. The man is not like the woman. Simple. So there's a differentiation. We don't need to go and read books like men are from Mars and women are from Venus to understand the psychological understanding. But Muslims should be trained, because some of us psychologically, we don't know the distinction. There's a change of a woman during her menstrual cycle, the delivering during pregnancy, the delivering of a child, of eating habits, of feelings, of emotions, psychological misunderstanding. In our culture, what is it? Every time a Muslim woman may say something, she's possessed with a jinn. It's a jinn inside her. Beat the jinn out of her. Because why? We haven't been trained. We haven't entered into the realm of the Quran to understand the psychological nature, the description, the understanding, that we're able to extract those lessons and teach our people the way that we should be conducting ourselves. So this is another lesson about bringing up the home, is the father should be teaching. Firstly, the husband should be showing himself that respect, and likewise instilling that within the children as well, that the mother is the queen of the kingdom, is the queen of the house, and one should be obedient towards one's mother and show goodness towards one's mother. But if the father doesn't show that respect, then naturally some children will begin to cling to that and show disrespect towards the mother. And thus we find numerous ayat inside the Quran straight after the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show goodness to our parents. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Your Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed you should worship none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and show goodness to your parents. وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Straight away we find inside Surah An-Nisa once again, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ, worship only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Associate no partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and show goodness and kindness to one's parents. So straight after the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we find the second lesson is the kindness and the goodness towards anyone's parents to such a degree that we find of showing lowering the wings of mercy, of compassion upon our parents. And the famous supplication, وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. Have mercy upon them as they had mercy upon me whilst I was a young individual. And likewise we find الطاعة في المعروف. Ta'ah, obedience, is to be in the good things and to be encouraging our children towards a path of obedience and not encourage them towards a path of disobedience. That if the home itself is trying to observe the rules and the regulations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will become easy for the individual inside the home to follow the rules and the regulations. But if there's a contradiction outside, there's a contradiction inside, then naturally the home will be left in a state of contradictions. Because the difficulties outside, there's now difficulties within the home. So there needs to be some form of balance. There needs to be a balance, a sense of unity within the home. In ta'a fil ma'roof, obedience was a good thing. And at times you don't need to impose obedience. Some people may think that a person needs to impose obedience upon people. If you try to live a life of obedience, then automatically that life of obedience will be, inshallah, will begin to spill over to the people around you, and especially one's family members and one's children that we find. Then we find that he begins to mention Luqman, giving another lesson to his son. يا بني إنها إن تك مثقال حبة من خردل فتكن في صخرة أو في السماوات أو في الأرض يأتي بها الله إن الله لطيف خبير. O my son, if there happens to be anything equal to the weight of a grain of a mustard seed, whether it be in a rock or in the heavens or in the earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring it forth. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is subtle in bringing out that grain and well aware of its location. So what do we find from this ayah? A natural fear. There's no need to force people, but to try to create an environment of natural fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because some children or some family members only fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when the person is there. Is that the type of tarbiyah that we should be giving? That when the person walks in, the people fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, show that fear. But when they leave, there's no fear towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus you find that the teachings and the way that the Prophet Muhammad conducted himself towards his followers, he created them, as we began with the ayat, to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wherever they are. Thus he said to Mu'adh ibn Jabal, ittaqillah haythu ma kunt. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wherever you are. Fi kulli makan. Fi al-alan wal-sir. Al-jahr wal-alan. In the public, in the open, in secrecy. Wherever you may be, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is a teaching, a prime teaching that we should be developing. We should develop inside our children and family members that belief and that trust. That if we told them, we've tried, exerted our efforts, prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, showed them the way, the two paths as we find, then we should leave them. That they will inshallah make the correct decisions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide them to the best of affairs, and not to become over worried in that sense. Likewise, we find that the real concept of taqwa, as we mentioned, is being all alone, that the person has this fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then after that, he begins to mention the rituals, the practices that a Muslim needs to develop after the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being vigilant towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, showing respect towards one's parents. Because some people, they may do that, they may have these general understandings. Then what is the next thing that the family is based upon? So now he mentions, Ya bunayya aqimis salah. O my son, establish the prayer. Wa'mur bil ma'roof. Wanha anil munkar. Wasbir ala ma asabak. Inna dhalika min azmi al-umur. O my son, establish the prayer. Order the good. Forbid the evil. Wasbir ala ma asabak. Have patience upon whatever calamities befall you. Indeed, that is amongst the strong resolutions or commandments that you need to adhere to. So here we find the commandment of as-salah. Ahmiyatul salah that we find. To tell our children to pray at the age of 7, to slightly force them at the age of 10, and to separate them from their beds is why? This is all tarbiyah. So when automatically they come to the age of puberty, it becomes second nature for them to offer their prayers. Many of us in our culture, what we find, leave them alone, they're still young, let them grow up. They may grow up until eventually they don't be bothered to pray. Likewise, wearing the hijab, she's still young, she's still a baby, still whatever, comes to the age of 15, 16, now you try to tell her to wear the hijab, it's too late. No one is being tyrannical, but even you take a baby from a young age, make them every so often wear the hijab, sees a mother wearing it, what will happen? Will automatically begin to imitate it. It becomes second nature. It's natural. But if we don't begin to have these concepts of tarbiyah and leave it, that's the device of the devil, to leave it to a later stage. Let them make their own choice. That's a way of Christianity. Let children make their own choice. We are the parents, you are the parent. They're just a child. As I mentioned, there must be some years of experience that a person has. So a person doesn't experiment with their children and leave them alone to their own devices, because this could lead on to many, many difficulties for the person inside in the future. So we find the first element is the establishment of the prayer needs to be developed within the individual. Order the good and forbid the evil. That's the life of a Muslim. Many of us, we just offer our prayers and we keep it as a personal relationship. But it's ummah that we know. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. This is the best ummah ever raised up. Order the good and forbid the evil. So that begins with teaching our children in a good manner to order the good and to forbid the evil. You'll be surprised at how many grandparents have given up doing haram things or begun to pray or begin to do good deeds when the grandchildren say to them, "Oh Baba, why do you smoke? What's that you do? What's that fire coming out your mouth? Why don't you go to the masjid? Why don't you pray? Why don't you read the Quran? Why don't you do this?" You'll be shocked of how many young children have impressed upon their elderly individuals, made them give up so many bad actions. It melts into their heart to make them to begin to think that my own grandson, my own granddaughter is telling me this is haram, this is munkar, this is bad. Is it not time that I begin to abstain from this? So if sometimes maybe the direct son is not able to make a comment to the people around them. But train your children, as we mentioned, to have that strength of that iman with good words, that they will naturally say certain things in their naivety, in them being children, but that will have great impact upon the people around them, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and bring them closer to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise, you find, wasbir ala ma asabak, to have patience regarding whatever befalls the individual. There's something else that we need to teach our children, our family members. Alhamdulillah, we have good lives. We have good lives, there's no doubt about that. وَنَشْكُرُ اللَّهَ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى ذَلِكَ. We thank and we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. We eat well, we dress well, we live well. We have so many luxuries of life that we have living inside these lands and this environment. So وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا أَصَابَكَ. And we need to train ourselves that have patience, that when calamities and difficulties do come, that we're able to bear these calamities. As remember, as we began, if we want to create a strong ummah, it cannot be an ummah based upon luxuries. Not to say luxuries are haram, but we need to teach our children, teach our family members that if things are taken away from us, if the blessings are taken away from us, can we return back to live a simple life, a basic life? Is it possible for us to do that? And so if a person has that iman and that yaqeen, it will become easy for the person to return back to that life. And likewise, we find amongst the final advice of Luqman that he mentions about humbling oneself. That a person upon this earth, وَلَا تُسَعِّرْ خَدَّكَ لِلنَّاسِ وَلَا تَمْشِ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ كُلَّ مُخْتَالٍ فَخُورٍ وَاقْصِدْ فِي مَشْيِكَ وَاغْضُضْ مِنْ صَوْتِكَ إِنَّ أَنْكَرَ الْأَصْوَاتِ لَصَوْتُ الْأَمِيرِ حَمِيرٍ. Then he advises, and turn not your face away from men with pride, nor walk upon the earth in insolence through the earth. Verily Allah likes not each arrogant boaster. Likewise, trying to be moderate in your walking and lower your voice. Verily the harshest of all voices is the voice is the braying of the donkey. وَلَا تُسَعِّرْ خَدَّكَ لِلنَّاسِ. Sa'ir that we find, ulama of Lugha mention, is a disease that goes into the neck of the camel. So the camel raises its head, raises its neck. So this disease meaning that the person becomes arrogant. Arrogance is not the path of a Muslim. So sometimes you find how many children at times are arrogant. I possess this, I own this, I have this, or family members, we have this, we do this, etc. That's not the way or path of a mu'min, of a believer. A person should not be arrogant, nor should a person walk in a state of arrogance. And as you find that some people, some Muslims walk in a state of arrogance to show their pride and their arrogance. This is not the way of a Muslim. Likewise you find, do not raise your voice. There's a time to raise the voice inside the maw'idah, in the admonition, in the reminder, in the khutbah, in jihad, or to announce something or to warn someone. As for the normal procedure of a Muslim, don't raise your voice. Indeed, the raising of the voice is like the braying of a donkey. That's an evil description, a bad description. To resemble a human being like a donkey. The donkey brays. So the Muslim, when they speak, etiquettes of speech are told to us how we address and we speak towards one another, and specifically towards the Muslims around us. And likewise, we find that in conclusion that these various extractions that all of us can go back and read the ayat inside Surah Luqman, the 31st chapter of the Quran, to extract these various lessons, the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rights of our parents, the order to establish the prayer, to order the good, forbid the evil inside the society, to bear the harms with patience, to be moderate towards our brothers and sisters in speech, not being arrogant in any manner. All this will help to create a good society. And likewise, find another surah, a whole complete surah which talks about the society, is Surah Al-Hujurat, the 49th chapter of the Quran. These 18 ayat, if you go and study them, you'll find all of the rules and regulations of how to create the ideal Muslim society. And thus we should begin to return back to the fountain of the Quran, to extract the lessons from the Quran, to once again to become a good Muslim household, because one Muslim household makes a village makes a town makes a city makes a nation, and a nation eventually makes an ummah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq and ability to be good to the flock which is around us, flock which is underneath us, to try and exert ourselves to be good role models towards our children, towards our family members. And then if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq and ability to begin to deliver that message to the rest of our brothers and our sisters and the wider Muslim ummah and community, make us amongst those individuals الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ, those who hear the statements of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and implement them to the best of their ability. وَقُولُ قَوْلِ هَذَا وَأَسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لِي وَلَكُمْ وَلِجَمِيعِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.